The title of my presentation is A Cosmopolitan Remapping of East Asia and the Asia Global. And the subtitle, Notes Toward Asia Global Cultural Studies Forum, AGCSF. Of course, I prepared this presentation as ways to set the tone for this forum, involving various multi-directional tasks, which I'm going to have chance to explain just a little bit of taste of it. Because title is Cosmopolitan Unmapping, we need to remapping and unmapping. Unconsciously, I was thinking both of them. Cosmopolitanism need to be explained first. Cosmopolitanism is different from multiculturalism, and we're all familiar with multiculturalism as one of the major policy of our society, especially we are standing here in Canada. But cosmopolitanism going beyond and further than that, and I thought we are in the salient time to talk about cosmopolitanism to address precisely the problem has not been addressed through the current practice under current practice of multiculturalism. So now, cosmopolitanism often translated as lover of other culture. Love of other culture, if someone called cosmopolitan, is usually characterized that way. But there's a more profound meaning to cosmopolitanism. First, what cosmopolitanism emphasizes is that it is not just about tolerating different culture, which often the multiculturalism is implied in. So multiculturalism is about what? Respecting other culture. And the respect in the way that also tolerate is always implied there, as if each of our culture has something intolerable to other, which I found problematic. Because ultimately, most successful, mature, multicultural society should be a society filled with cosmopolitans, meaning that each individual who lived in a multicultural society should have more knowledge on the neighbor's culture, others' culture, than those who are living in relatively homogenized society, such as China, Korea, Japan. They are not officially multicultural nation because 97% of populations are quite homogenized, identical race. It's very apparent as soon as you travel there and hit the land. So cosmopolitanism is about exploration of differences. The key word here is exploration. So it is not about just respecting the differences, but there is a significant emphasis on in-depth learning, exploration of differences. Through that, this is also a way of learning. There are more than one way of thinking. Seeing and things get done. This is what we often forget. There are more than one way of thinking. There are more than one method of getting things done. Thus, I omitted this term, apathetic tolerance. This is currently a little bit of problem in our society based on my observation as undercover ethnographer and also former journalist and academic. There is this notion of mosaic, Canada as a mosaic model. There is apathetic tolerance going on, which always accompanies certain tolerated ignorance about each other's culture as well. Through the cosmopolitanism, I think we should turn apathetic tolerance to empathetic and multi-directional understanding, meaning that you are enriched through diverse method of thinking and living yourself. And through that also, this is actually perhaps my own contributions. Cosmopolitanism is about to overcome experiential bias, which is my own term. Experiential bias is, in fact, the condition of humanity itself, because we only know as much as we experienced. So we are victim or we are product of biases unless you know, learn the other ways. You are inherently prejudiced and biased. Thus, cosmopolitanism allowed you to explore different side of experiences and visions and perspectives. So for you to overcome that inherent condition called experiential biases. And also, cosmopolitanism is about reducing your blind spot. You learn to learn when you're getting driving lesson, which I failed twice, by the way, and I don't think I'm gonna pursue further, spending too much money. And you learn to look at the blind spot by your instructor. And blind spot is precisely what I noticed, that people who doesn't really understand there are more than one way of thinking. It includes all different racial groups, by the way. We all are product of our own experiential biases. We all have a blind spot, but the only difference is that whether you acknowledge whether the fact that you have a biases and your blind spots. And there are also attitudes that does not acknowledge those, and that's kind of problem we should also address. And thus, it is about expanding your experiential knowledges and also through the expanded learnings. And I will tell you this one more things. Cosmopolitanism, or moving from apathetic ignorance to empathetic multidirectional understanding, to be cosmopolitan is intellectually demanding process, by the way, guys. It is a very difficult process because it is more demanding. Make you work harder than being comfortable in your small biased than. As I'm art historian also, this is the closest images or very useful referential images. We know this term multi-directional or multi-perspectives from art history class. Now I juxtapose two images. One of them is the East Asian, is relevant to actually Asia Global Forum, East Asian traditional landscape painting, which is underpinned by the Taoist notion of human being are tiny dot in the nature and the universe. So be humble. And also the painting is not painted from single point of view, which is in fact important assumption that Western illusionistic painting has. So this is painted from multi-perspective, multi-view perspective painting, as we call it, and or bird eye view is the term we also use in art history. And this one is illusionistic painting, chiaroscuro, assume that the viewing point is a single point of view. What is salient about this actually comparison between two images is that those who painted this and started painting this one, in fact, it's Italian Renaissance artist invention. It in fact implied in scientific discovery through which, based on the objectification of nature, so to speak, possessive colonial gaze has been slowly cultivated through this way of viewing, which just one of the visual cultural relics seemingly highlight the development of that very focused one-directional viewing for the purpose of objectifying, exploiting, and control. And this is not my own speculation. This is one of the key discovery or discussion of post-colonial scholar, art historian has discussed over 2 decades. Now, when I decided to juxtapose these two, I just found this such an interesting case. The kind of painter society who paint this one was destined to, in fact, start colonialism, because that's the ways to go to possess, to control the world. And the society who actually assumed this as an idea, meaning that human beings are tiny dot in the universe, animals, plants, cosmos, you are just the tiny dots. They will never invent machine, and they will never objectify the nature than that Western counterpart would have done. And thus they're destined to actually not to engage in what we call technological innovations through a reductionist, systematic objectification of nature. They venerated nature too much. And thus, in fact, the power imbalance, military political imbalance occurred, and East Asia became subjugated to the Western power through 19th centuries. Is there any, so this is qualitative discussion of how the multi-directional perspectives are, however, in a way that is something that as Asian subject living in a Western society are something that I think I'm obliged to discuss more to be able to address this as a past and perhaps other mode of multidirectional gaze is ways in which we can embrace non-possessive and decolonizing gazes and perspectives. And to go beyond the East and West a paradigm here, which I attempted a little bit, or it can be misunderstood that way, let me highlight this one. This is not just East Asian product. Multidirectional view is in fact everywhere except this particular moment of scientific reasoning that in fact intensified Western development. After a certain period of time, this is Picasso's Cubist painting, early prototype. And Cubists, in fact, famously tried to embrace multiple viewpoints to go beyond, to move away the illusionistic painting. And the point I'm trying to make is that this idea of multidirectional gaze is not something that is to be found in the exotic romantic land. But in fact, what is also relevant and interesting is that Picasso talked about this art as a new reality. He wanted to create an image of new reality. That is what we're trying to achieve here. Of course, slightly different context, I'm extrapolating this one. We need to create a new reality through multi-perspectives, which can be found in the Western tradition as well as Eastern tradition and the rest of the world. And including, of course, indigenous tradition has great resources for multidirectional perspectives. Let me quickly throw a few words. Multiculturalism, we have different models, melting pots, mosaic, and syncretic assemblage. 10 minutes. And now these are, melting pot has been the one which used for to illustrate the US multicultural model, mosaic, Canadian. And this is my suggestion because both of them has revealed its weak side. In terms of our estimations, as a person or a society in this side of North America, we tend to like to celebrate mosaic model as more successful than melting pot. Why? Because mosaic respect each other's culture, while melting pot sounds like more of assimilation to one model. But as I assessed, mosaic has revealed its own problems because it in fact allowed tolerate apathetic tolerances and also ignorances kept for 100 years. Because mosaic, if you visualize, there's always gap between. Then should you become invested in melting pot? No, it already revealed its own problems. Assimilation to the one model, meaning that the model of the majority ethnic groups, white normativity has been the norm, which, and in theory, multiculturalism tried to address as a model to overcome. Thus, syncretic assemblage or syncretic organism is the model that we should think about. Syncretic is the term many of my students know. I love this term because it does not assume any of division between. It's very tactical. And it assumes that every culture is syncretic. There's no hierarchy between pure, impure, authentic, hybrid. Because in fact, multicultural society like us is that we are exploring or taking advantage of different resources from different groups. And that's in fact quite utopian idea that in fact a multicultural society can be most powerful, most interesting society in the world. And so, through the cosmopolitan enrichment, I believe that syncretic assemblage is something that that model of Canadian society we should envision in the future. We're gonna skip that because we have a little bit run out of time. Now, I want to just talk about the hyphen, meaning of hyphen in Asia Global, or Asia Global Cultural Studies Forum. I try to retain the hyphen between. And there's a reason for that, because the hyphen, this space between Asia and Asia Global, is indefinable space. And Ashok is here, who actually supervised the Keiko Hart thesis, who I was examiner, who talks about her hyphenated identity and invested a lot of her paper thesis spaces to articulate this one, and she's gonna come here later and talk about this. And so that Asia Global, which is the meaning of which is going to be clear through next couple of slides. And before that, I want to just talk about how East Asia, the way in which East Asia perceived. Interestingly, despite all other data, still many people think Asia as through Orientalism or somewhat primitivist primitivist prism, meaning that it sees as a static entity and out of habit, and everyone suffers from that. And that's Orientalism, primitivism invention of course, 18th, 19th centuries, which interestingly still remain to be intact. In the most of the Western metropolitan, thanks to perhaps perception unrevised by the dominant groups, Euro-American groups, who actually have invented this and continue just to carry on the same ideas. However, as you know, many of the people who knows Asia, each of them are in fact extremely dynamic entity. In fact, the notion of futurism, you should associate Asia with the futurism. Some of our presentation will highlight techno-orientalism. Japan has been one of the electronic kingdom, and however, we have the double consciousness. Japan as something static, Japan as those electronic kingdom. How that goes together has not been reconciled in our brain. Korea's current national slogan is Dynamic Korea. And Korea is extremely fast moving forward countries. China is undergoing through industrial revolution, has been changing much more rapidly than any other country in the world. So dynamic is more suitable words than static. Another misconception, very common, if you go to conferences with academic, 80% of them still struggling with this notion. Whoever used the term global with Asia, they all try to talk about global as a westernization. I've been suffering from these misconceptions and stagnations, and I stopped going to conferences because I got so bored. So globalization we are talking about here is not West, because global equal West. This equation is something that first should be tackled, because global is always glocal. Every location, including West and East, they are all in fact creating a syncretic assemblage, because we are all beneficiary, victim of globalization and multi-directional sphere of influences to each other. And thus, in fact, Asia Global is aiming to contribute to decolonizing power field of the world, as well as ready to be beneficiary of this decentralizing power field. I'm aware that I'm going over the time, but I will take advantage of, as it is, so to speak, keynote speech. I need to cover a few keywords, and so I will speak a bit faster, because these things are something that you are familiar, and I'm going to just flag it for you. Asian Global from culture perspective, those who are focusing on cultural studies, you know this already. Synergy was actually completely swept through the Western society since 17th and 18th centuries. through what ceramics and architectures and etc. The Japonism, since 19th century, ukiyo-e, wood block print, those amazingly decorative and tantalizing visual images from Japan, and also the kimono, those things were very much become, in fact, part of important menus in Western cultural life. Korea jumped into that trend later because Korea was underdog, squeezed in between these superpowers, China and Japan. Korea, however, recently we hear so much about Korea wave called Hallyu, which is term invented by Chinese journalist Hallyu, Korea wave, since late 1990s. The element in Korea wave is media culture, entertainment culture, as well as beauty culture, fashion and food, and etc. So interesting to see different dimensions of it, right, through the history. Geographically, I will just highlight this one to just refresh your memory in case you didn't know. East Asia is a quite large, populous region in the world. As you can see the images, China is a very huge and large country. Korea is here and Japan is here. And East Asia is, without dispute, one of the most core areas of world economy and emerging center of political and cultural power. When I say center, we are talking about decentralized regional centers in the world everywhere. And this is like just FactSet from CIA FactSet and China huge. We know that population-wise is competing with India. That they are topping first and second. Korea small relatively, of course. Territory-wise, I think it's 1/10 or maybe 1/100 of China. And population-wise, we are double of Canadian population, by the way. Because we are here, we should just compare with what we have here. Japan is larger than Korea, and population-wise almost twice. It's a warm place, and also economy is good. You know, people have more babies when economy is good. And Canada is, in fact, we have a second largest territory in the world, but because we are very cold up there, and population-wise, Korea is a really tiny country, but we are half of the Korean population. Language-wise, each country uses Japanese, Korean, Chinese. Okay, there's no common language among them except written language Chinese. If you got to understand some Chinese classical Chinese character, you can communicate by writing. But otherwise, we should speak English to understand each other. And Canada, we speak multiple languages, but English and French are, of course, two main, and other languages. This is something that people do not know. There are multiplicity and complexity of spiritual, regional, cultural, political tradition. One missing word here is capitalism. Traditionally, it's influenced by Taoism, Confucianism, Buddhism, legalism, shamanism, geomancy, Shintoism. But after after encounter with the West, republicanism, modern liberal democracy, idea of modern democracy, communism, Christianity came in. Now, has this disappeared? No. Syncretic, integrated into this culture. So it's become very interesting. What is not included here is capitalism. And I declare or I argue our state, capitalism is a modern religion. West and East, we all make capitalism as a religion, meaning materialism and consumerism. And Asia is not free from that. We will skip this one and skip this one as well. Asia immigration, we need to talk about ourselves here, why we are here. North America immigration has been, Asian immigration has been very distinctive because North America was land of portrayed as new world where there is new opportunities, and that started since 19th century. It was, of course, there is this bloody history that European settlers came over here and cracked down the indigenous people here. But nonetheless, they brought this, so to speak, Western culture in the North and both South Americas, and that become opening new economic world. And so most of Asian immigrations to North and South America, predominantly North, is, in fact, this is important differences, voluntary economic immigrations and political immigration as well. That makes a difference from, let's say, South Asian a colleague who are in fact suffer from direct British colonialism. A lot of this involuntary displacement and also Black Atlantic slavery. This is what makes post-colonial study of Asia different from others. We need to pay attention. And also thus, we can easily assume, oh, maybe it's displacement. Immigration is thanks to the effect of Western imperialism and colonization. Yes, to a certain degree, but we should mention this is also purely, however, none of Asian countries were to become direct colony of Western imperial power, most powerful imperial force in the world. It's mostly voluntary. And so then they become subject of minority in many of these Western metropolitans. Now, just quickly, cut long story short, we are in Toronto. Toronto is known to be arguably second largest. We have a second largest. Let's just talk about Korean communities because that's statistics I have. LA has the largest Korean community in North America, and Toronto has the second largest Korean community in North America. Of course, the Chinese and much larger populations. It's North America are in fact very important region where there are a lot of this global Asia global subjects are living and assimilated to the pre-existing culture as well as influencing, bringing their own culture. And there are other locations that Asian global immigration has been happening, but it's minimal compared to that. Of course, there are quite significant South America. Asia global in political economic perspective. These are some of things that social scientists we hear, which culturalists like to avoid because it can cause tension in the listeners. Japan famously, and that led to the yellow peril or yellow fever. Just no, yellow peril or yellow fever? No. Yellow peril is the kind of hidden term that people do not want to, is made a taboo, but there is a yellow peril, this notion exists, which occasionally is smudging out. I can see through global media discourses. This is a history, short history. Japan, Russo-Japanese War, they beat Russia, so that was scary and shocking. Pearl Harbor was a shocking event to Western. This is actually from Western perspective. I'm introducing that. And Japan has become the second largest economy since 1970s. China, this Cold War rival with two Americans, and now become a factory of the world, and so it become economic power after 1980s, second largest economic since. So in fact, two of these countries we are talking about is the second largest economy. You can see that combining these two are quite formidable. If you are those like, kind of hegemonic type of people who are like to talk about these things. Korea is very tiny country. It's only interested in soft power because population-wise and things. However, after expanding influence of K-drama, K-pop, anyway, still become 10th largest economy, rising from Korean War. And now yellow period, new Orientalism, I see a lot. Interesting. Politics of rising Asia discourses, both spoken by Asian themselves as well as Western media. When Asian talks about that, it's definitely very nationalistic. Let me just state that. We are rising, finally, overcoming this subjugation to the Western power. They do that. Japanese do, Korean do, Chinese do. And in the Western media, when they say that, it hides yellow peril there. Hidden fear, threatening other, this type of threatening other is here. How do you know? As there is this continuing Orientalism going on, and Orientalism is a term I hate, but it's form of what? Mode of knowledge through misrepresentations. And it's also mode of otherization. They are strange because they are different. But rather than showing interest and encourage exploration of differences, it typically goes to very strange. Unscrutinizable Chinese. Strange. Why there are so many boys in boy band? It's very strange. Odd. So our purpose here is to deconstruct and reconstruct toward multi-directional learning. Deconstruct involves critique of Orientalism, critique of colonial legacy, another term here, critique of transnational, transcultural biases, term that I also invented, which in fact we're doing exactly the same thing because of different form. They understand that as a differences. For instance, one American film critic after Old Boy came out and become Korean film industry become quite recognized in the West and was regarded as something coming. Korea film is coming. On that note, it was quite interesting New York film articles that, hey, look at the character. They are eating octopus alive. How strange these people are. And the last sentence of the article emphasized these people at the end, the Koreans are at the end, people who eat rotten cabbage every meal. Rotten cabbage here means kimchi, which within 10 years are nominated as one of the 4 healthiest food in the world. But you can see what kind of otherization going on, right? If you don't think carefully, this is just appear to general public. Oh, they are strange, they are odd. We should be very careful. And so that kind of transnational cultural biases, I forgot to mention. So rotten food here means yogurt, miso soup that maybe the writer have eaten in the sushi restaurant for the lunch was rotten. It's fermented bean, soybean paste, all the rotten, and cheese. Rotten dairy product is a cheese. It's so smelly and sticky. I love some of them. And that's what I call transnational bias, which because of our ignorance, we haven't quite filtered and under control of these biases, although we are talking about the same thing. Reconstruction is about exploration of alternative epistemologies, values, relational and organizational models. And Asia is not object of romanticization, but place of different alternative modernity and new civilizational model. And also dialectic of Asian legacy means there's a light and shadow. Let's don't talk about just the lights of Asia because we are in the West and something trying to address ethnocentrism. No, Asia is a place where there is a dialectic of its own legacy, and also its tradition always are both good and bad. Traditions either often portrayed as a bad or portrayed as a good. It's in relation to your politics, but both are problematic. You need to be embrace ambivalence. Traditions are both good and bad. Some of our speakers will talk about that today. And last slide, because I'm going to cut the last 2 because I know that I spend quite a long time. These are some of the things you hear a lot nowadays, and let me just contextualize it. Philosophy, medicine, everyday technology. Currently, Asia global epistemology solution now trending. And merging with alter Western movement. Now, what I'm talking about Western is I said, oh, are you I'm organizing Asia Global, would you like to come? Oh, Marie Kondo is what the reaction I got. So I have this Marie Kondo. I don't know spelling of that. Is it correct spelling? Yeah, Marie Kondo, yeah, and because she's cool right now. And music store just opened in the downtown Toronto. So these are the 2 things the graphic designer who I met in Starbucks just mentioned. Now, what is it? You just see the product and surface of it. What's behind is that, let me just give you a very short survey. What is coming here, which has been always a traditional knowledge that Asian who live in Asia doesn't know why it is new in the other side of the world. In terms of medicine, Asian approaches are very preventive, well-being preventive. Health and wellness is a huge here, which nicely converging together. Traditionally, Western idea and traditionally Western medicine's approach is about repair. After problem cause, you repair. And there are the positive and negative side of both of the approaches. And traditionally Asian philosophy, mind and body never separate. Non-duality, non-dualism. But Western tradition has been famously dualistic since Plato. And so there is negative, positive aspect of it. And since the beginning of 20th century, many of the philosophers, including, of course, Henri Bergson and also Gilles Deleuze, their first chapter starts from mind and body is not separate. It's the first sentence in their philosophical text. What we call post-structuralism is famously endorsing non-duality. Ecology is always with Asian life, meaning human nature, animal, cosmos is one. People would not understand why it is separate, or it's hard to understand for them. While they are doing some Western life, they still think this is the just norm. But scientific objectification famously, notoriously has been creating separation of those, and then we are repairing right now. All this environmentalist movement since 60s and 70s is all about bringing us ecological way of life that I put some of my campaign poster. My students took some of them out, or I don't know. Later I will introduce you to that station, okay? And minimalism has been something that really into some of the rooted in their tradition, aesthetics and everything. Japanese Zen, of course, austerity, Koreans. Chinese are complex. And love of him. But anyways, it's a very well robust tradition. Excess in the West. So in a way that current living wellness tradition, or emphasizing how to overcome this obsession with the excessive product and things. Small house movement, minimalist movement, which I'm currently very interested in, low waste movement, it all converges with minimalism and ecological way of life, and also non-duality, and this is all tied together here. And health and beauty discourses, for instance, K-beauty discourses are all about prevention, maintain the best out of oneself. Western discourse, beauty discourse, repair, cover up imperfection and alteration. This is huge in YouTube right now and everywhere. And K-beauty is representative of that. Warm water dispenser in Shanghai airport was a culture shock to me. This is what Chinese have been doing over thousands of years, which they didn't understand why other side of people drinking cold water in the morning. And then all here's wellness discourse, which I read every day. Now here, everyone talks about don't drink cold water, don't drink warm water in the morning. I love this one. Sitting toilet, Western invention. We all adopted it in the West, in the East. Squatty toilet. Have you seen? Squatty toilet is the it right now. If you have a constipation issue, you should use squatty toilet. There's a product available out there. I will tell you, I suffered and I overcame now finally. Embracing the Eastern wisdom, which I abandoned for a long time. And Marie Kondo, cleaning guru. And less is more. That sounds interesting, isn't it? Because everyone, as if they said, oh, we learned something from Marie Kondo. Less is more. It's in fact, what is the one of the modernism's main ethos. But anyways, what is another thing that she brought in is a spiritual connection with the object. She say thank you before they abandon. This spiritual connection is something that's very familiar for any East Asian subject who grow up their culture. And I took many photographs of my old shoes before I say goodbye to them. I did many people do. Muji, focus on material. It's not about appearance, it's all about truth, honest material. It lasts longer. It's not as fancy looking, but lasts longer. Anyways, let me cut here. Thanks a lot. Do you have any questions? All right, okay, thanks. I know I talked a lot, so we can reduce our break time because I eat up the... do you have any immediate questions by any chance? Using my non-authority here, I'm going to give at least 5 minutes for you to ask questions, otherwise you're going to forget. 5 minutes? Patricia, I think you have something.
Do you think we're moving in Canada towards a more syncretic approach to diversity culture?
Do I feel that moving to Canada, from my perspective?
No, as we're right now in Canada, do you think there's an attempt?
Oh yeah, definitely. In fact, this is actually what has been going on, and it should be more emphasized of its benefit, which has not been emphasized enough. So because of also it's thanks to certain hegemonic white normativity things, and everyone in a way that, so to speak, those are subject new immigrants or immigrants who are minority, visible minority, are shy away to see the true value contribution they are making, because it's not as valued. It's almost like treated as if they should be just doing in their private places rather than actively appreciated, which I found interesting, and this should not be the way. To make a country much more interesting and diverse and strong, and that's precisely what Americans are good at, because they are, thanks to their capitalism, they promote what is good, whether it's from South Africa, from Chinese, Singaporean, Taiwanese. Many of these internet companies, they are startup. The figures are, it's just every race. I mean, but they're not emphasized. And culturally, yes, that's, I think, what we should actively promote and embrace rather than shy away. Yeah. A very good, I think, yeah. Anyone more questions? I know I talked a lot. Do you have any questions? It's supposed to be a lively forum, by the way. Okay, you know what? I talked a lot, so let me just have some rest and listening to others talk, and then we can come back and have more discussion later. Yeah. Okay. Now we'll just give away the second speaker. You have a new one? Oh, it's not this one? Okay, well, why don't you come here, please? Yeah, next speaker is Leon Hu. Is it I just downloaded from this morning?
From this one? No, it's a different one. I also need this to read my notes.
So just one. The problem is we're not going to be able to record this one.
No. I need the slides to be on this because
I see.
but this is
okay.
But that's not the slide. So I made a new Dropbox. So it's not this one.
I think we should alter the order. So you need to submit it to the Dropbox.
I did.
This is something that we should do. Why don't you then we can record this.
That was you.
Just using, you can take your tea and the snack as well, and just give us 2-3 minutes. And there's handout, guys. Handouts.
What about when I'm sitting here? Yeah. Okay. So I might do that.
Okay, we are ready, guys. Are you making coffee and teas? That coffee is, by the way, is organic coffee. I grind did myself yesterday night. No, I don't know. Okay, we're ready. Hey guys.
Hi guys, my name is Leon. Today I'll be presenting on Taiko Chang's How Ephemeral Works. Deng Xiaoping's 1978 economic reform, which came into effect 2 years after the death of Mao, is perhaps the most influential policy of the country's communist era. Deng's reform seeks to rectify Mao's failed economic plan and his isolationist policy. In the last few decades of the 20th century, China in a rapid manner plays catch up with the West and its neighboring industrializing countries by following the Western model. Confronted by the success of capitalism evident in the Four Asian Tigers' success, China leaps itself forward once again, but this time with capitalist economy doctrine. This reality conjures the need for modernization learned from the loss of the Opium Wars, where Chinese invention of gunpowder was re-engineered by Europeans for its own destruction. The death of Mao and the opening of China are crucial to the development of avant-garde art in China and internationalism after 1989. It is in this particular socio-political context that Cai Guochang begins to develop his conceptual art practice of utilizing gunpowder to create paintings and ephemeral performances. This presentation explores how the medium of gunpowder functions as symbol of tradition and violence, informed by the ancient tradition. The artist reveals trauma of communism through the gesture of explosion. Tsai's appropriation and reinvention of the gunpowder form not only reclaims tradition, but subverts the notion of backwardness associated with Chinese heritage. Tradition in its postmodernist facade uses its cultural baggage to return the orientalizing gaze. The immediate association of gunpowder is often tied to violence and militarism. Discovered by the Chinese alchemists in the Tang dynasty, the invention subsequently traveled to Europe through the Silk Trade route. In the 13th century, gunpowder becomes the basis of military weapons such as cannon and handgun in Europe. In addition to its usage for military purpose, gunpowder is also a key component in the production of firecracker and firework. Its immediate connection to Chinese tradition forces the viewer to consider the implication of gunpowder and firework as signifiers of Chinese heritage. The specificity of the historical context must be taken into consideration when interpreting Tsai's work. When gunpowder becomes a weapon of destruction, it becomes a way for the West to flex its power. The result of this intervention deepens the fundamentality of the gunpowder's symbolism. Ironically, Chinese invention becomes a cause of its own fall. While Europe preoccupies itself with scientific development of gunpowder, China limits its usage of this particular chemical for purpose of entertainment. As a result of superficial cross-cultural contact, spectacle created by firework denotes the romantic image of the orientalized Chinese culture, people, and tradition at large. Through Western intervention, the main component of firework, the beautiful ephemera, becomes a spectacular image of destruction. Thereafter, the spectacle of death, created by means of weapon, is associated with modernity and power. China realized its insignificance in the global context when confronted with the Western and Japanese colonialism and imperialism. As a cause and effect of reality, China transforms itself in multiple stages. Connecting to Taoist belief of transformation, gunpowder's ability of destruction metamorphosizes from violence to art. This sense of shift becomes loaded with China's complicated history of the late 20th century, especially when considering the political change from Republican to Communist. Mao's model of transformation emphasizes the principle of no destruction, no construction. Liberal value and literati culture for Mao are associated with bourgeois way of life, thus not suitable for communistic society. The destruction of the freedom of association and the right to protest, as seen in the case of Tiananmen Square, imposes a false sense of social coherence. Cultural revolution seeks to destroy education and critical discourse. The demolition of individuality and his or her right to education serves to place its population under tight state control through propaganda. The destruction of the South becomes the construction of the new nation-state. Tsai takes on layers of tradition in his choice of medium that encompasses historical, cultural, and social legacies. No Destruction, No Construction, Bombing the Taiwanese Museum of Art is an approximately 1 minute long ephemeral piece realized at the Taiwanese Museum of Art in Taichung, Taiwan on August 21st, 1998. The site of the happening is a complex that is made with links of multiple rectangular shaped structures. An overall linear structure is linked with gunpowder on the top of the building as well as the interior of the museum. Tsai then detonated the gunpowder bombs, creating an instant fire along the edge of the rooftop. The gunpowder bombs placed in the interior produce different effect that resembles traditional Chinese firecracker. This spectacular performance bombs the museum physically and ideologically. Octavio Zaga argues that Tsai's technique suggests purification through fire. Connecting to the Taoist shamanistic aspect, the destruction is parallel to spiritual practice of Taoism, which places emphasis on the equilibrium of yin and yang. Through the firing process, Tsai restores the soul of the Taiwanese Museum of Art. This idea of healing through intervention of the site is central to the artist's practice. As Tsai says, all forms of existence, heaven, earth, and human beings, lose awareness. Time and space are suspended, or rather, they return to their primal moment of being. They're in harmony with the chi of the universe. In a flash, eternity is achieved. This momentary eternity is made visible through the immediate silence preceding the spectacle, while the smoke from the gunpowder bomb returns to one with the universe. It is through destruction, which interrupted the soul of the Taiwanese Museum, that the balance of qi is restored. No Destruction, No Construction, Bombing the Taiwanese Museum of Art demonstrates the conceptual interconnectedness of Taiwanese Museum of Art and Chinese tradition in relation to the medium. Taiwan, located across from the Taiwan Strait from China, is where the nationalist government retreated after being defeated by the communists. Tsai grew up in Guangzhou, in the province of Fujian, which is one of the closest cities to Taiwan. In the 1950s, along with Tsai's childhood years, conflict between the Republic of China and People's Republic of China resulted in frequent air raids. The sound of explosion recalls the trauma of his youth. Therefore, the bombing acts as an extension of trauma, operating as a sign of suppression. At the same time, the sound traces back to the memory of happiness because firecrackers are used for celebratory occasions. When Tsai sets the museum, the symbol of Taiwan as a nation-state, on fire, he is also resituating the history of conflict. I argue that he attempts to harmonize the imposed difference between the two nations on the opposite side of the strait. In the act of destruction, he is reinventing his own relationship with the trauma, to some degree thinking through trauma with the filter of happiness in the medium, and the complicated relation projecting from the artist's own memory and cultural amnesia. The repetition of the medium manifested in various of his performances signals the revisiting of both trauma and memory that prompt association for domestic viewers. The encoded message in his work challenges the viewer to renegotiate his or her relationship with the work itself. Ling Zhang and Taj Frazier, in playing the Chinese car, pose the question of whether or not Tsai Guochang is a pro-China nationalist. When juxtaposing works of Tsai with Ai Weiwei, the former artist appears to participate in the construction of China's new high cultural image, whereas the latter actively resists Communist China's nationalistic agenda. I want to consider Tsai's footprint of history firework project for the opening ceremony of the 2008 Beijing Olympic Games, realized in Beijing, China on August 8, 2008. This project is an ephemeral happening using firework technique. Tsai was appointed by the Chinese government as the director of special effects for the 2008 Beijing Olympic Games. A series of pyrotechnic displays were produced for the occasion. Footprints of History constitutes a series of 29 footprints marching from Tiananmen Square to the Olympic Stadium. Each footprint disappears a second after it emerges, which conjures the essence of Taoism. In between each step, the silence becomes a meditative process that denotes both a great silence and a ceremonial expectation before the explosion. If each footstep functions as a mark in history, then the symbolic appearance in firework carries the weight of tradition in the medium of gunpowder. The appearance and disappearance, like destruction and construction, energizes and harmonizes the qi of the site. Tsai's intervention of the historical site is of significance. Unlike the bombing of Taiwanese Museum of Art, the ancient city symbolizes imprint left by powerful forces from the unseen world beyond the east-west binary. The traditional medium of gunpowder acts as mediator between the seen and unseen world, connecting to the profound influence of Taoism. I think of the marching process as one that embraces the inherent underlying Chinese tradition in the rapid development of the country. For Chinese audience, or those who can associate the symbolic footprint, the firework, with the spiritual footprint, the ancient city, as not merely development of history, but one that reclaims tradition for the sake of higher spiritual essence, as opposed to backwardness associated with Chinese heritage or non-Western belief systems in general. The link between the symbol of tradition and symbol of progress, facilitated by Tsai's projection of footprints, connotes a communication between East and West. This metaphorical mode of contact conjured his ongoing project for extraterrestrials, which began in 1989, where the artist uses gunpowder to create works that attempt to communicate with extraterrestrials. The impossibility of accomplishing connection between human and extraterrestrials signals a non-reciprocal relationship. However, in Footprints of History, the lack of dialogue between East and West is not characterized by the technical challenge to communicate, but blocked by the Western-centric notion of modern and development. For the curator, Kurota Raji, project for extraterrestrials constitute communication with the whole of mankind, the whole of history, through the use of the medium of gunpowder, a Chinese invention. Tsai's avant-garde gesture functions as an abstract expression gesture to create an alternative dialogue that challenges Western hegemony. The agony of development in non-Western countries lies between destruction and construction, a fine scale of balance, in which the participants must negotiate on the level of the self-destruction required to achieve that improved version of the self. Tsai's project show during the Beijing Olympics effectively reclaims and subverts the sign and systems of ancient Chinese culture within the postmodern global arena of sport, public diplomacy, and cross-cultural traffic. This is certainly an act that interrogates the imagination of the Orient and blurring the binary construct of East and West. The gesture facilitates a dialogue with global audience and presents a new China after a series of destruction and construction. To conclude, I want to return to answer the question raised by Zhang and Frazier. Is Cai Guochang a pro-China nationalist? His works are frequently seen as having nationalistic tendency, especially those produced in the late 90s. I, however, argue that the artist is less concerned with nationalism, but more interested in the complex condition in which contemporary East Asian artists come to terms with tradition and cultural baggage. He learns from the rich lexicon of Chinese heritage and his own lived experience to reinvent visual vocabulary that critically reflects history and globalism. I do not deny that footprints of history is void of nationalistic agenda. In fact, this particular body of work utilizes the polished, commercialized postmodern aesthetic to reshape China's international image. Perhaps gunpowder and fireworks are inevitably seen as exotic objects, but prompts a multi-directional dialogue. Contemporary Chinese art, as demonstrated by Tsai's artistic practice, returns to orientalizing gaze by moving beyond the paradigm of East-West, creating a new internationalism that rejects the center and periphery model of contemporary art. The underlying localism in his work reflects the reality of Asia as a site where a notion of multi-modernisms take place. And that's it. Thanks. Questions?
Yeah.
Questions?
I'm the moderator. You didn't know that I'm coming, right? I'm the moderator of the discussion. So again, please check the time in case there are so many questions. Guys, yep. Any questions? Again, it's going to be a lively discussion, so don't be shy. I think while I was talking busily, I think that more people have arrived, and hey, I haven't asked you to say hi, but we will do it later. Lex, our designated omnipresent discussant, do you have any questions?
Not yet, but actually, could you play your last slide up again?
Yeah.
So role of discussant, whenever there is some shyness going on, we go back to the discussant and ask them to ask questions. Yes, Florence.
I was wondering if I had actually never thought about Chang's work in any sort of like orientalizing gaze of anything, even in relation to a dialogue of like any binaristic East-West. I was wondering if there's like a reading that like just because you are global does not necessarily mean you like talk to Europe in any way, or that it changes that. I guess that my question is more, is there a way of, I guess, like globalizing or talking about the global aspect of his work between China and Taiwan, or between parts of East Asia, and whether it's like necessary or relevant to include like the so-called West?
Well, I guess that's why I sort of opened this essay by saying, so I talked about something about the Opium War, which has something to do with like the form of gunpowder being reappropriated for a completely different purpose than what it was intended for. So I guess that's the reason why I thought of his work as deconstructing the binary between East and West, because if the form of, if that very form of the weapon for destruction has underlying Chinese tradition, then doesn't his work sort of interrogates the meaning of the form itself? I don't know if I'm making any sense, but yeah.
I just want to add that, by the way, this artist, your pronunciation, his name must be more precise. Can you pronounce again?
I think it's Taiko Chan.
Taiko Chan, that I mispronounced throughout the semester. Taiko Chan, one of the thesis students, master students have actually finished the thesis on his work, especially about focusing on the extraterritorial piece, and she won the, I was supervisor, and she won the medal as the best thesis of CADM this year. And I invited her to come over here, and Catherine is not here, right? Okay. Okay, right. She's not here yet. So I think what I found interesting is that you introduced gunpowder as one which disrupts, so to speak, orientalizing gaze, because gunpowder it was originally invented or discovered as some kind of medicinal purposes, and so it was before it was really used as a source for kind of destructive weaponry forces. It wasn't as ardently adopted that way, but it was West when they were introduced that material, they just took it and make it as, so to speak, weapon in a way for the purpose of destruction and controlling, defeating the enemy. While in fact gunpowder has a multivalence, different aspect of it, as I just introduced. The origin is medicinal purposes and currently used in many different ways, in festive ways, to, in a way, the Taoist notion of, doing these explosions in the site is just kill the bad spirit and things. So in a way, purifications and things. But because of all this, so to speak, really Chinese invention, is kind of move away from traditional, let's say, the repertoire of Orientalist objects, which is all about what? Something pretty and something that is, something can be, something serves to entertain you in a way. That type of the expectation is defined through the gunpowder, and it's explosive and destructive power. So I guess that's what is the argument about, right? How it defies the orientalizing gaze. It returns the gaze in a way that we are different from what you think, yeah.
And I guess the reason why I decided to include the bombing of the Taiwanese museum is I thought it was interesting to think of bombing the site as a method for, what's the word that I use? Purification of the site.
Yes.
So that got me thinking about that method as a way to interrogate, or because it seems like he's always trying to do something to the site in many of his projects. So I wanted to bring that up because it connects to the Taoist aspect of Chinese heritage. So there is that underlying tone which conveys localism, if that makes any sense.
Now I have that question precisely about the Taiwanese museum piece that you wrote. Do you have any question by any chance? I don't want to take too much advantage of being. So we all know, well, at least many people who have been following Asian politics know that there's a tension between Taiwan and China, mainland China, and it was separated, and so Taiwan has not been able to gain the independent nation states because of the opposition of China, because, well, we were once one and we wouldn't allow you to be the independent state. So it's one of the key political debates within Taiwan as well. People are divided. Now, I was always wondering, my research is not as deep as yours, okay? And so when the Taiwanese side invited Tsai Sook-Woking, who is coming from mainland China, and asked to do this explosion project, which notoriously has a double meaning, it can be both, let's say, if you think about the political tension between two nations, why Taiwanese would bring Chinese artists to simulate as if it is some kind of destruction. You use the term destruction. But then there's the other side of it, because if you turn it around as a Taoist way, it's a purification. But so artists they always art thrive in ambivalence, of course, ambivalence meaning, I wonder whether you have did discover some of other stories behind tension, debate, before they invite?
I didn't do that research. But from my understanding, I thought it was very interesting that they invited Tsai Go-chang because I'm Taiwanese, and I thought that was very interesting that they would invite a Chinese artist to bomb the Taiwanese Museum of Art.
That's what I mean, actually.
And I know inside the Taiwanese Museum of Art, there's a lot of artworks that were stolen from China.
Well, why you say stolen?
Well, they just took it without. They took it when they were retreating to Taiwan. So I thought that was very interesting. That his gesture is a gesture for purification, but also kind of nationalistic. But yeah.
Yeah, full of ambivalence. All right. Any more questions, guys? How's the time manager, please? Oh yes.
It's not a question, but it's more of a comment. I really liked the way you connected the idea of ceremony in his practice and the idea of appearance and disappearance. There's a real tension there that you brought out in his work.
And I thought it always traces back to that model of constructing the new China. So there is no construction without destruction. And I thought his project kind of always goes back to that idea. And there's something very Taoist about that tension that you mentioned. So yeah, thanks.
More questions? Those who are interested in, read also the master thesis. She discussed how this project also continuing the landscape painting tradition in different way, and
For
so
sure.
very interesting. And one of the most, I think, creative artists in 21st century, I would say, and I think continual maybe research will be required. Okay, any more questions? Otherwise, thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you.